Benvenuti a tutti, benvenuti a tutti. Questa è l'inizio di una delle 5 conversazioni per il premio Gregor con Rezzori per l'opera in traduzione. E sono 5 finalisti, assisterete, avete la possibilità di ascoltare, di vedere tutte le conversazioni. Questa conversazione che ho la fortuna di condurre con Anuk Arudpragasam, il cui libro Passaggio a Nord, che è stato pubblicato da Teseo e che nella bella traduzione di Andrea Silvestri è uno appunto dei 5 libri finalisti. Tra poco passeremo all'inglese nella conversazione con Anuk. Quello che mi preme dire è che questo è un libro che ha un ritmo speciale, ha un sound particolare e la traduzione credo che lo renda particolarmente bene, seduttivo e melancolico. È una sorta di viaggio, è un viaggio dentro la memoria, è un viaggio per andare a rendere onore alla scomparsa di un essere umano, un viaggio fatto dal sud al nord dello Sri Lanka, fatto da un protagonista che si chiama Krishan. Ma la storia, che è una storia che tutti voi che leggerete il libro saprete ritrovare, che in questo caso è la cosa forse meno importante del libro. La storia è la nota, è l'atmosfera che accompagna questo viaggio fatto per commemorare, per ricordare una persona che è scomparsa in un paese, lo Sri Lanka, che conserva tracce, che mostra le tracce di una violenza, di una guerra civile, di una guerra in corso. Quindi è un libro che in qualche modo obbliga il lettore e la lettrice a entrare e uscire continuamente dalla parte interiore del rimuginamento del protagonista alla violenza anche fisica evidente nel viaggiare, il paesaggio che cambia, gli edifici distrutti, che in qualche modo impone al lettore stesso di fare i conti con la distruzione, cioè ricostruire la memoria e rendere onore a una persona scomparsa mentre mentre si attraversa un paese distrutto. Uh, so, Anuk, first of all, congratulations and welcome to this conversation for the Premio for Rezzori. I know you are in Berlin now, and I'm happy to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Andrea. And it's nice to talk to you. Yeah, after a while, I think a couple of years since.
So I will start from usually there are lots of very thoughtful questions at the very beginning, and then all of a sudden, towards the end of every conversation, people talk about the translation. But since we are a prize for, we have a prize for translation, and it's a prize for translated novels, I will start from the end in a way, from the usual end. Your book is in Italian sounds like a Passaggio a Nord, and the translator is Andrea Silvestri, and to me, my impression is that he did a great job in this translation. And translating is a very political act. It's an act of empathy as well. So I wanted to first share with you this question. Did you work with the translator? What's your idea? So how important for you and for your writing, how important is to be translated and how important is to be in touch or to work with your translators?
Um, that's a good question. It's interesting because I am a novelist, but I also consider myself a kind of apprentice translator. I do translate small works, so on and so forth, between my own mother language, Tamil, and English, which is the language that I've been educated in and that I write in. Um, in a way, already a lot of the texts, in a way, the texts that I write in English are already translated texts, and they're already texts that take into account, for example, uh, the fact that I'm writing in a language that is not my own, and that often is not the language in which the characters are speaking. And so when this so when this English text is translated into it's interesting. I wouldn't say I have a lot of I've had a brief correspondence with Andrea, and I've heard obviously I can't read the Italian myself, but I've heard from a couple of people that the translation is beautiful. Um, but usually, I guess in terms of I guess I wait for the translator to be in touch with me if there's anything that um, that they need to ask. But in a way, a lot of my work is fairly, I don't know how to say, self-explanatory, or it, I don't know if I'd say I don't leave much room for ambiguity. But um, one of the things is that in writing, because so much of this, because I write in English, and because the conversations that or the characters that I write are often speaking in Tamil, so in this novel, I have avoided direct speech, for example.
That's
It's one of the problems of, I think, translation. One of the obvious challenges is, for example, if every language has its own dialects, its own vocabulary that changes from class position and geographical location. Um, it's impossible, I think, if I want if I was writing in Tamil, I could very easily convey the class position, the caste position, the regional location of a character by how I would have them speak in Tamil. And I think this is probably the case also in Italian, right? Or in the
yeah.
various dialects of Italian. And um, and if I'm there's no way to write those to signify these things in the same way if I'm translating the language, if I'm translating those conversations into English. There are models or of I guess non-standard Englishes, but we all have very specific associations of you
Oh,
know of English spoken in Northern England, of English spoken by certain racial groups in certain parts of the US, and they have there's really no way for me to convey a lot of things that one conveys in conversation with when I'm writing in English. And so one of the solutions in this book was simply not to have conversation, or to report all the conversation secondhand.
oh,
And
yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
and I would be I haven't really had a conversation with Andre about it, but I would be really curious to see how um, whether that made a difference into translating this book into Italian.
That's so interesting because, in a way, you are saying that the idea of translation, or at least uh, the idea of an audience that is not the same language, that reads in a language different from the language where things happen, right? That is the story. This, um, in a way, has an impact on your style, meaning you decide to not write dialogues because of that. And that's so incredibly interesting. So there's a limit in your writing, and this limit, in a way, becomes your very style. So when a reader reads your book, besides being amazed by the beauty of the book, one thing that is really uh, striking is the idea that you are in this flow of thoughts, and in that there's nothing really breaking it. There are no direct speeches. There's nothing really forcing you to get out of your mind, of the
Mm-hmm.
mind of your main character, Krishan, right? So, and this is very interesting because this that I would describe as, this is Anuk style. This is the way he writes, and that's true. But this also comes, is also a consequence of dealing with different countries, different languages, and the distance between the language in which things happen in the novel and then the language in which the novel is actually written. My question, the other question is, uh, so this novel is, and I think it's another of the pluses of this novel, is at the same time a very intimate novel. It's a novel of mourning, and is a novel dealing with absences, in which the absence, in a way, is the main character, different kind of absences. So there's intimacy, so it's an intimate novel, and at the same time, the so-called background or the setting is so powerfully historically political in a way, right? And the two things are kind of mixed together, and one could read, one reader, I imagine different kinds of readers reading the novel as an intimate novel or as a political novel. So, how was the start? What was the starting point besides what it became, got to become? So was you starting from the setting, meaning from the political or historical setting, or you started from the intimacy of the relationship?
It's yeah, that's really, thank you for your comments, and that was, yeah, that it's an interesting question. I don't I think personally I yeah, you know, I'm often told, and it often, I mean, responses of readers give me the sense that I am a political writer, that I write about material that is very political. But in another sense, I tend to be uh, it's not an instinctive, there's no, I guess, in me, I just don't happen to be an instinctively political person, I think. And I think the fact that these books read in this way just happens to do with where I'm from and the subject matters that I write about. Um, in a way, my own experience, I mean, the political material you refer to is really the war, racial politics in Sri Lanka, um, and the long history of violence against the Tamil minority in the country. And these things affected me a lot. But I would say, as with the main character in the novel, my response also to these events, to the events in our country, and to really, yeah, the death, is has been like very internal, has been very personal, has been very quiet. And so my own my I think I would say my instinct as a writer or as a novelist is to focus on intimate things, on intimate moments. What do I mean by intimate? Uh, uh, I mean moments where people view themselves as, you know, the freedom of being unseen, of you know, the sense that you get when you look at a person uh, through a window or through a keyhole, when they believe they're being unobserved. Uh, this is kind of yeah. There's an intimacy of, I would say, one is with the characters in a kind of intimate way, but in a way also this intimacy is a way for me to compensate for the otherwise brutality or the otherwise severity of the situations that I am writing about. I mean, writing or projecting this intimacy, or putting this intimacy onto these situations is a way of making them less violent for me.
Yeah, that's very interesting because for me as a reader, um, the intimate part is much. Um, I wouldn't say stronger, but for sure, I tend to think of this novel as an intimate novel, as an emotional novel, and as a very quiet novel, as if there's a specific silence in this novel. I would say it's hard to be able to really weigh silence, but there's lots of silence, and also the silence in this book has a specific sound. So this very long journey, this traveling uh, to just say goodbye, it's the one that's not there anymore, Rani, um, as a specific habitat that is a habitat of silence, and that silence is the only place where these thoughts can survive, the thoughts
Right.
and the things while traveling.
Right.
And
Bec-
this is something that is very striking going through the book, and that's another thing that I wanted to ask you, because um, this is when you were mentioning the war and all the political setting of the novel. I was thinking that in a way they held the setting and the historical setting of the novel. They help us think that there's a specific way of mourning or suffering, or being separated in every country, in every place. That meaning uh, um, uh, suffering for someone uh, in a place or another probably is not the same, because the setting, there's also a specific intimacy that happens in a place or another, even if it's not political at all. So the question connected to also what we were saying about your writing and the English and your mother language, Tamil. Um, so this book, to get to that silence that this book is full of, you wrote it there in Sri Lanka or somewhere else? You needed to be far away from your setting, or you were just there? Because my impression is that there's a way of, uh, it's a kind of a book full of memory, even if it sounds like present. So I was curious to see where you were writing it.
wow. Yeah. Those are. Yeah. That. It's. I would say that the. I mean, you're definitely right about the silences and the specific quality of the silence towards in this book, and the way in which these silences are um, preserved in different ways. The fact that the character doesn't really, you're right to say that the book is set in a kind of third person, in a kind of in the regular kind of present uh, of the past tense of the third person novel, but nothing is actually happening to the character. The character in the present of the novel is not really interacting with the world. Usually, when we move about, things from the external world um, involve them in us, involve us with them. They assault us in different ways. They include us. A bird calls and we look. Somebody says something and we turn around. We are continually being interrupted and continually interacting with the environments. And something that is very in all of the three scenes that this character is in, when he walks down the streets of Colombo after receiving the phone call, when he's looking through the windows of the train taking up to the north, and when he's at the funeral where he doesn't know anybody, um, and he's watching the body of this woman being burned. In none of these cases is he a participant. And the significant part of not being a participant is that because the world is not interrupting him or does not call him, his his thoughts are free to move. They have a freedom to follow a kind of internal logic, which is it's not often the case that one has this freedom. to simply think. Often one takes the freedom away oneself. But I wanted to write a book where thought. I mean, there's things from the outside world that can change the trajectory of a person's thought, that can cause it to eddy or slow down in certain areas, cause it to be diverted into certain other areas. There are also various internal pressures, desires, hungers, fatigue, that shapes these thoughts. And I wanted to be with a character, and I wanted to allow their thoughts to move in a way that was dictated only by a kind of internal logic. I wanted, if the outside world suggests changes in thought, I wanted the outside world to only in the most gentle way, only as seen through a window or from a distance. This novel it's a kind of, I mean, maybe another way to put it is about sight and sound, because you talk about silence. This book it doesn't have many sounds. It has a lot of visions. A lot of things are seen, and a lot of the things that are seen from a distance. What that means is you're seeing things that you cannot hear, because the sense of sight has a greater range than the sense of sound. It's interesting, in my first novel, which was also about this last period of the war, but it was set in the midst of a genocide. There was a lot of sound. And it's something I was teaching at the time recently. Actually, it helped me understand the role of sound and silence in these texts. I had to teach for a class Dante. I had to teach the Inferno, and I taught it in English, obviously. But one of the things you notice is that at the beginning of the entry into every new level of hell, you're not given. The character doesn't see things. The character hears things first. When you hear something before you can see it, it causes disorientation, right? Because if you can hear it, it means it's close. So at the beginning, he'll hear screaming or fire or hammering, and the effect is disorientation, because you can't yet see what is causing these noises. And this was very much the first novel that I wrote, which was set in the midst of the genocide, had a lot of sound and very little things that could be seen. This novel is kind of a novel about the everydayness of trauma. How do we understand trauma or the traumatic event, or the deposit that the traumatic event leaves on an individual when in the everyday, after the moment of the spectacular moment is taken away? Like, what does it mean to think of it in its everyday context? And so I think for that reason, I wanted to think about also what does it mean to watch such an act of violence unfold when, like the main character, you are far away from it. You feel or watch your community being destroyed, but you cannot do anything. You're forced to look from a distance. And so I think a lot of the silences are the silences of someone forced into a position of spectatorship.
Yeah, that's interesting, the fact that you were saying there's no sound, and I was saying there's a specific sound of the silence that is more or less the same thing, because it's kind of visions. It's kind of a train movie, a train story, and it's about there are lots of echoes, or at least for my ears, of a certain European tradition as well. Of Sebald and other writers who are in their thoughts, Walser, walking, traveling, going, seeing. But at the same time, there's lots of tradition in your writing, and the poetry that is in a way kind of the summary of what we are talking about is present in this novel a lot. And I would say it's a poetic view. Your view is a poetic view, but also the role that poetry plays in this novel is very important. There are specific quotations, and there's a certain idea of developing your identity or their past, his past, according to poetry or what he read or poems. So what's the role of poetry? So why is that so important for you?
I don't really. It's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, the poems that I chose are all. I mean, I do tend to think. I mean, these are poems, but they're not. You know, they're not. They're not example. They're not. It's not lyric poetry. They generally tend to be kind of from kind of longer narrative poems,
Yeah.
or from hagiographic texts, religious texts that are in verse, or from dramatic texts in verse. But um, I tend to think through. I tend to think through stories a lot. I tend to think, as in, my means of processing a new experience is through analogy with other narratives or other situations. I like the juxtaposition and the contraposition of placing similar but different narratives or situations together. But I was struck with each of these poems. I guess it's interesting. I would say, okay, there's a couple of there's two separate strands. There's, on the one hand, I would say I do, or for while I was writing this novel, I was interested, or when I started writing this novel, I was interested in finding different ways to relate to my own literary tradition, which, as I have mentioned, is by and large absent when I write in English. I mean, I'm very conscious of the fact that I write in a language that is not my own, and there was a period of time in which I was interested in thinking through my relationship to the canon, the Western canon, and the various different South Asian canons. And I guess reading through these texts and finding spaces in which these texts could be put next to my own writing had felt important to me at a time. I mean, it turned out that, I mean, it's so the way the texts occur is that they're often given rereadings. The texts are all reread in the context of Sri Lanka, because these texts are all belong to various different classical traditions from South Asia, from the Sanskrit, from the Tamil, from the Pali. So these are traditions that go back thousands of years, very sophisticated and long traditions, and they're also elite traditions. They're courtly traditions often, and so there's a kind of, how should I say, there's in a South Asian context, there is something, I wouldn't say jarring, but something unusual about placing these materials from high literature into the middle of the Sri Lankan War. We are at the southernmost point of the subcontinent. We are the darkest people of the subcontinent, and very much kind of removed from like the high literary centers of Sanskrit and so on and so forth. So, for example, so I put those. I'm bringing these poems into these contexts, and I am rereading them in different ways that I guess was part of an attempt to take ownership or to relate in some way to these other traditions. But maybe now, maybe after having written this book, it's from a political point of view, or from the point of view of relating myself to the past or to a tradition, maybe it's not a direction that I am so keen on or like still exploring anymore. But it was, I think, it was part of an attempt to relate to a tradition.
Oh yeah, and it's in a way it's very evident that it makes it more interesting, very interesting, the fact that the reader can feel both traditions, can feel a very Western tradition, and can feel an Asian tradition, and that makes the famous sound that doesn't exist in this novel, besides the silence. The last short question of this story, that is a story of a trauma, is a story of a separation, is a story of the end of a love story, the reappearing of the second half of a whole, of two people that were together, and a political activist that disappears and reappears also. So in the love story that is told in this novel, there's the whole novel. There's intimacy and the political attitude at the same time, and the mourning, the loss of a person. And I was wondering, that's my last question. So we are living now, and this book is published now in a moment of course, everybody will ask you and has asked you many times about that, but we are in a moment of migrations and of wars that are shaking Europe in this moment, and that these wars and this very moment just reminded us Europeans that we were just lucky for a while to not have wars, whereas there are wars everywhere else and migrations connected to these wars. How much you think also based on what happened when you published the book recently in other countries, this book is read or is gonna be read as a novel that can be also important in this very historical moment.
I mean, my honest feeling is that it won't be very useful, I suppose. I guess I wonder. I write in English. I mean, these books are translated into various European languages. It's the novel, so it reaches a bourgeois audience, and I guess we understand the bourgeoisie in terms of as a class that is not really invested in deep structural political change. And so the novel, I don't know, for me the novel is a conservative medium, and I'm not generally a conservative person, but I don't expect anything I write to make a difference. I also write about a genocide that took place in my country, from which in response to which I suppose my community, the Tamil community of Sri Lanka, has been forced to abandon the project of, I guess, of nationhood or identity or equality, and I would say the kind of primary collective political goal post-genocide for us is genocide recognition, to have it acknowledged that such a thing happened in our country at such a time. And I suppose maybe to this goal, because there's a question who, I don't know, even I don't know. I mean, this is the major goal, political goal now in response to the events described in this book. But when it comes to acknowledgement or reconciliation, everybody's already dead from these events that are described, and there's very little reconciliation for them or the ones who have lost people who are close to them. Maybe it would be nice if these things were recognized, if there was some space, political space, because there is none in Sri Lanka where these historic events can be recognized. But I mean, at the end of the day, no, what happens in Sri Lanka, I don't really believe it could really truly matter in a political sense outside this community, outside my community, and I really, I'm skeptical that the novel in its I guess sociological role in Europe or in North America could help in any kind of way.
Yeah. Okay, it was a great conversation. And thank you, Anuk, for being with us.
Thank you for those lovely questions.
Talking with. This is the cover of the Italian book with Anuk Arudpragasam, and the book was the Italian title of the book is Passaggio and is a finalist for the Premio Gregor for Rezzori. Thank you, Anuk.
Thank you so much,
congratulations.